Russellville winter doesn't do snow so much as it does a kind of gray resolve. The air tastes like coins. The sky gives you the back of its hand. By late afternoon on December 28th, I'd decided the day had already taken what it wanted. Another cup of burnt coffee, another inventory sheet with a smear of carbon, another phone call from a driver who swore his load was on time while I watched him appear as a blinking question mark on the dispatch screen. Woodline Motor Freight after Christmas is a quiet that hums. Trucks idling, copy machines ticking out their last will and testament, the computer room warm as a breathing animal. It's where I worked because I liked numbers that behave, the way they stack and listen when you tell them to. That day, the numbers felt fidgety. I kept resetting the radio between a ball game that wasn't on and a news brief that wouldn't commit. My shift lead, Joyce, had gone out to see if the loading dock heater could be coaxed back from its sulk. The office smelled like dust and toner, and the cheap pine cleaner the janitor swore would get anything out of anything. The first I knew of him was air pressure. The door opened, and the warm, stale pocket around me changed shape. Boots on tile. A step and a half too slow, as if he had rehearsed smallness and now was deciding how much of himself to take back. I didn't look up immediately. You learn that in offices. Make the person announce themselves first so you know what voice you're about to be in. "Ma'am," he said, mild as a clerk in a store that sells the same thing as 30 other stores. His coat was the kind men wear when they've stopped caring what a coat says. Army green, clean enough, cuffs polished with use. He kept his hat on. His face was older than his hair, creased, wind-scoured, a tan that looked permanent and joyless. He smelled like cold and something metallic, like a handful of change kept too long. He did not smile. He arranged his mouth into neutral and let it sit there. "Can I help you?" I asked, because that is the sentence we are trained to use to negotiate with fate. "I'm looking for Joyce," he said, and the way he said her name told me she did not belong to him. "She around?" "She stepped out," I said, not adding for a minute or two because minutes are the only currency you have if the day decides to get strange. "Can I tell her who?" He moved then, not forward but to the side, into the room's geometry, the way a man fits himself into a crowd he's already measured. I saw the second gun first, because the first one was already pointed. The second was the kind you can carry without worrying about weight. The first was neat and squat and cruel. He didn't point it like men do in movies. There was no elbow flourish, no threat set to music. He held it the way you hold a tool you intend to use efficiently. "Please don't stand," he said. I didn't. Not bravery. Calculation. The desk between us was good for papers and bad for bullets. "This is going to be simple," he said. The gun traced the idea of a line from my keyboard to my chest and stopped there. "I want you to call the police." That isn't how it goes, I thought, which is stupid, but your brain will do what it's practiced long after the game's changed. "Call the police?" I repeated, because repetition buys seconds the way coupons buy groceries. Cheap, a little embarrassing, useful. He nodded once. The hat did not move. "You're going to tell them I'm here," he said. "You're going to tell them who I am! You're going to tell them it's over!" The phone sat between us like a dare. My mouth felt too big for my face. My hands remembered a million keystrokes, and none of them useful. "When they get here," he added, conversational, "I'm going with them quiet. So long as you don't get ideas." "What kind of ideas?" I asked, not because I had any, but because he wanted to hear the shape of my fear in my own voice. "Screaming, running, that sort of thing." He glanced at the glass in the office door. It showed us in a flat, stretched reflection. Me small and rooted. Him taller than I'd thought. Shoulders square from a life of lifting and carrying and not being thanked. The reflection made his gun barrel look longer. "We're just going to wait." "What should I?" I stopped before I said call you. He noticed anyway. A smile like a paper cut moved across his mouth and was gone. "You can call me, sir," he said. "I'd prefer it." He inched closer, just enough that his coat brushed the corner of the desk. A whisper sound. Nothing dramatic, but it made my spine arrange itself 2 different ways at once. He watched that happen. He took out his second hand. It wore no glove. He set it on the back of a spare chair like he'd decided to stay long enough to sit. "Please," I said, shocking myself by hearing the word as if it came from the next room. Why me? You're here, he said. Not cruel, not kind. And you look like you can follow instructions. We were quiet together. A truck coughed awake outside. Somewhere down the hall, a dot matrix printer sang its ugly little hymn. He kept his eyes on mine, not challenging, not making a big thing of winning, just the steady look of a man who's held a gaze through weather. Pick up the phone, he said finally. I did. My hand shook so precisely you could have measured the frequency with a scientific instrument. I dialed. The sound of each number felt like a history test. 911, the operator said, brisk but not rushed, the voice of someone who's carried too many mornings to panic about one more. What is your emergency? I looked at him. He nodded, as if I were a student reciting a line we'd practiced. My name is... I gave it. I'm at Woodline Motor Freight on. I gave the address. There is a man here. He has a gun. He tilted his head a degree. It meant go on. He says I should tell you his name, I said, and then I didn't because he was waiting for the taste of it in his own ears and I could feel the importance of making him want it. He says he wants you to come. Is anyone hurt? The operator asked. Her voice softened at the edges. The words dropped their shoes. I looked at him again. He had the oddest expression, like a man at a party listening for his favorite song. Yes, I said before I knew whether it was true in this room. I think yes. The law office. The mini-mart. Taylor Oil. The rumors had been running around town like kids without coats. He'd left his footsteps everywhere that morning. People were already stepping into them to see if their feet fit. What's his name? The operator asked. He touched the brim of his hat, an old gesture learned at some time when men still did such things. I said it. There are words that rewire a room when you speak them. His name found the corners in the baseboards, the fluorescent hum, the clipped edge of the desk calendar with its picture of a lake no one here had seen. The operator's breath checked and then returned with company. Another voice came on the line, the one they use when the world tilts. We need you to stay on. We're on the way. Is he pointing the weapon at you right now? Yes, I said. Is he saying anything? I looked at him. He looked at me like we'd been married a long time and had learned how not to say the wrong thing in front of company. He says to tell you he's finished, I said. His mouth twitched. Approval, maybe. Or nostalgia. Okay, the voice said. You're doing fine. Keep talking to me. Tell me about the room you're in. The room. Beige walls. A corkboard with a neat rectangle of sun where a safety poster used to live. 2 file cabinets with a drawer that sticks and another that screams. A window no one opens because it's painted shut with 10 years of careful neglect. A computer tower with a post-it on it that reads, "Don't turn off!" and no one knows who wrote it. I described it while he listened like I was reciting from a book he liked. He moved the spare chair out from the desk with his hip and sat. The gun didn't waver. He put the second gun on his thigh, one finger resting alongside the trigger guard, like a man showing he knows which fork to use. His coat fell open. A brown belt held a gut that wasn't a gut. Just the looseness that comes from years of eating what's quick and never being hungry enough to complain. His hands were long-fingered and practical. The nails were clean. He had shaved that morning. The line along his jaw had been made by a steady hand. Tell them, he said mildly, that I'm not going to hurt you if you don't make me. I repeated it. The operator let the sentence stand the way you let a lie sit in a room, because correcting it would make the furniture fall over. Is the door locked? She asked. No, I said. He raised his eyebrows. Go on, but I can lock it, I said, as if I were suggesting a topping on a pizza. Do, he said, gently. I stood, the gun traveling with me across that 2-foot arc, like a very patient dog on a taut leash. I locked the door. The click sounded like progress. He let me back to the chair, then made a small motion with the barrel, and I knew it meant sit. I did. How many people are in the building? The operator asked. 4? 5? I said, telling the truth and lying at the same time. Russellville looks big when your heart is small. They're out, hiding. In the bathroom, maybe, or blank in their cars, or halfway to Dardanelle with their radios off because sometimes the news bites. Help is coming, the operator said. Units are very close. He heard that part, the timbre, the shape of soon. He tilted his head, listening through the walls like a mechanic listens to an engine. Do you need water? I asked him. I didn't know I was going to say it. I knew how bad men work. They either want you cowed or useful. I had used up my allotment of cowed. Useful was all I had left to trade. That's kind, he said, surprised enough to show it. No, thank you. Merry Christmas, I said, which is insane. It was 3 days too late and exactly on time. He looked at the tiny tree someone had set on top of the cabinets, aluminum and dust, one red ornament trying hard. He made a small noise that hadn't started life as a laugh, but had taken a few steps in that direction before deciding against it. Ma'am, he said, it's been a long holiday. We breathed together in that ugly room while the seconds piled up like receipts. He was so calm it made the walls apologize for existing. He didn't fidget. He didn't swivel his head. He didn't perform. He inhabited the space the way an old refrigerator hums. Present, patient, indifferent to your opinion of it. He watched me the way you check the stove before bed. Habit, a glance, a responsible act. You got kids? He asked, like a barber making daylight. I shook my head. You married? No. He studied that. That's better, he said. Less to hurt you with. He wasn't threatening. He was inventorying. Of me. Of the cops I could bring down on him by saying his name. Of the stories the town would tell if I died in here, which for a brief, blue-lit second I pictured. My mother's hands on a kitchen table. A pastor saying my name into a microphone. The paper printing a photograph where I looked like someone else. Tell them, he said after a while, that I haven't lied to you. I did. The operator said, keep him talking, and I nearly said felt. He keeps me talking because he was better at this than I was. He knew which questions keep a person alive. Ask about family. It's an oxygen mask. Ask about time. It slows the terrible part. Ask about the weather. It covers everything. You from around here? I asked him. It came out like a woman trying to untangle a necklace with cold fingers. Close enough, he said. Been a while. Where were you before? He smiled with just his eyes. Other side of this room, he said, meaning the side where you're the person who sits down and is told what to do and does it. You worked at Taylor Oil this morning, I said before my sense could pull on the leash of my mouth. Yes, he said. Before that, the law office, I said, because once you begin naming things, it's hard to stop, even if your own voice is putting a bruise on the day. Before that, he said, home. We looked at each other. Home is a small word. Sometimes it's the whole story. I didn't ask. I didn't have to. The air around him had a residue to it. The way rooms feel after something has happened and you're too polite to check the carpet. He read the not-asked question in my face and didn't answer it out loud. He set his jaw and patted the second gun with 2 fingers, the way men soothe dogs who can't understand why you're leaving again. Do you want to sit in the other chair? I asked, offering the smaller of 2 evils. The other chair had arms. It would make him feel contained. His eyes flicked to it, then back to me. He shook his head. Do you want me to say anything particular when they get here? I said. I could hear the sirens in the distance now, a faint ribbon that tugged at the corner of his mouth like a smile he wouldn't wear in public. You're doing fine, he said. Folks make mistakes near the finish line. Are we near it? I asked. He looked at the clock without moving his head. We're in it. Will you put the gun down when they come? The question walked out of my mouth like it had been waiting years. He considered. If they let me keep my dignity, he said. If they don't act the fool. How will they know? I asked. They know me, he said, and he didn't mean the cops. He meant Arkansas, the air, the paper, the man at the mini-mart who had found the money drawer open like a mouth that would only swallow bad news, the lawyer who had taken a breath too late. The names stretch and shrink in a town this size. We all live at the same distance from each other when the radio tells it. Someone's at the door, the operator said in my ear, and the hallway obligingly filled with loud, disciplined sound. Men calling to each other in phrases that sound like synonyms for safe. A knock. Not timid. Controlled, the way you knock when your knuckles are also the law. Miss, a voice called through the wood. We're here. Are you hurt? He nodded at me, the way a husband tells a wife to answer a question they've already agreed on. I'm not hurt, I said. Is he with you? The voice asked. Yes. What's he doing? Waiting, I said, and the word felt like a bar laid across a doorway. We're going to ask you to slide the phone under the door, the voice said. Okay? He shook his head, slow. The gun didn't move. He flattened his other hand, palm low, a gesture so gentle it made my eyes sting. No. I repeated the gesture. No. The room held its breath. Okay, the voice outside said without a fight. Okay, that's okay. We're going to keep talking to you, miss. You both are okay. He closed his eyes like that sentence, you both, had been a small gift. Tell them, he said, soft enough for a person standing with their ear to the door to lean closer and fail to hear. Tell them I've come to do what I wanted to do. It's all over now. He said it like a liturgy he'd practiced alone. I carried the words to the phone without changing their shape. Editor's note, historically attributed. Okay, the voice said. I pictured a man with a mustache and a wife who packs his lunch even when they've been fighting. Okay, we hear you. You're doing well, the operator whispered, but now it was for both of us. We were very still. That is a strange thing to do with a stranger, to be motionless together as if we were about to have our portrait taken. He looked at my hands. The right one still trembled, an honest little machine that refused to accept instruction. He set the gun carefully on his thigh, a decision you could measure with calipers, and reached into his coat pocket with the other hand. I flinched hard enough to move the chair. He stopped moving. His hand came back out empty except for a folded paper towel, one of the tan ones that feel like shame. He offered it to me. I took it. It had the clean suite of laundromat and something else like old pipe tobacco in a drawer. I breathed into it, a ridiculous idea that worked. You got a mother? He asked, not out of curiosity, out of a desire to see where the edge was. Yes, I said. I was going to say worries, but worrying didn't cover the geography of it. She collects church bulletins, I said instead. It is the strangest thing, the truths your mouth grabs at when the floor moves. He nodded once, as if that explained me. Mine did too, he said. Used to. We didn't speak of the other part of that sentence. The air between us was crowded with ghosts and habits and poor arithmetic. He blinked slow, and when he opened his eyes again, the man in them had stepped back a pace and left behind something almost tender and infinitely more dangerous. Exhaustion. How long has it been? I asked, and I don't know if I meant the day or the life. 2, he said. The sirens were closer now, their sound flattening against the building like weather. His jaw tightened in little twitches, muscles doing math without him. Too long. Outside, the hallway gathered itself into procedure. Sir, a voice called. This is Sergeant. He gave his name like a promise. We're going to ask you to step away from the door. We can see your shadow. We don't want anyone to get excited. He almost smiled at excited. It was such an Arkansas word for a room with a gun in it. You tell them, he murmured to me. I will, when they knock. I did. The sergeant knock came. Authoritative, 3 beats that understood doors. He stood, the second gun kissing his thigh with the clink of an object that knows its job. He took 1 step back from the door and then another. The sergeant knocked again. He nodded at me like a conductor cueing the violins. I'm going to unlock it, I called. Slow, the sergeant said. I reached. The lock turned like it wanted to be good. I stepped back. He did too. The door opened and the hallway filled itself with bodies and blue, guns tilted not at me but toward the floor, which is the posture of men who want to leave a day proud of how little they shot. The sergeant spoke my name. I didn't know how I knew it coming from him. The way he said it made it clear it had never been a secret. He told me to come toward him. I did. He stayed where he was, hands visible, the first gun held in the air, with 2 fingers like a man offering proof that a snake has been defanged. He looked at me, not apologizing, not asking for something he was owed, just present, fully there, the way a tree is present in a storm. Sir, the sergeant said, we're asking you to lay the firearm down, step forward slowly, and keep your hands where we can see them. He blew out a breath through his nose, the sound a horse makes when it has decided to be trained. He knelt. He set the gun on the carpet gently as if it might bruise. He stood again, put his hands out into the kind of air that eats men. The cuffs clicked. He flinched once, not at the metal but at the sound, a memory, a note on some private scale. As they turned him, he looked back at me and put a sort of sentence on his face, something between thank you and I didn't lie, and there are versions of this where you aren't. And then the hallway swallowed him up in a choreography they must teach in a class with boring fluorescent lights and a lot of coffee. I sat down on the floor without asking anyone if that was okay. The carpet was industrial and clean in that way that means no one's bled on it yet. My hands didn't stop shaking. The operator was still in my ear, ready to be dismissed. "You're safe," she said. I nodded, as if the phone could see, then remembered the whole world was watching me now through a hole in the ceiling I'd never noticed before. I said it out loud, because words make things true sometimes. I'm safe. And then, because the body has its own agenda, I cried and couldn't make it graceful. The sergeant crouched far away, respectful, like I was a wild animal that might decide to bite the person who thought petting was kindness. He told me his name again. He told me what would happen next. He did not say good girl because he was too smart to treat me like a dog who'd fetched the right stick. I wiped my face with the paper towel he'd offered me and realized it smelled like cinnamon. Later, I would remember that when people asked me to describe him, I would tell them nobody smells like cinnamon by accident in Russellville, not in December, not with the heater out and the afternoon dying. I would tell them what he said and what he didn't, and what his hands did when they weren't holding anything. I would tell them he'd asked me to call the police, and they would ask me to repeat it, as if I'd misheard my own day. But in that minute, the only thing that mattered was the warm patch on the carpet where his boot had been, and the way the room had become an honest size again, and the clock had remembered how to count backwards from 60. Outside, beyond the low windows, a wind picked up, and the little aluminum tree rattled its single red ornament like a nervous laugh. They gave me a blanket because that's what you do with shocked people in buildings, even if the building is warmed by machines and men saying the word copy. A paramedic touched the back of my neck like he was asking the day for permission to return me to it. Someone brought water in a paper cup that went translucent where my fingers clung. The sergeant said my name again softly, in a way that made it a landing and not an order. "Walk me through it," he said. So I did, because I understood immediately that talking is the rope someone throws you that happens to double as a net. I told him about the door pressure and the 2 guns and the hat that wouldn't come off, about how he spoke like we were checking off items on a list at closing time. I told him about the cinnamon. I told him about the things he didn't say, which felt louder than the things he did. "Did he threaten you?" the sergeant asked. "He didn't have to," I said, and felt foolish as soon as the words were out, because they sound like something a person says in a story to make themselves seem brave. I added, "He said he wouldn't hurt me if I didn't make him. He told me to call you." "He tell you his name?" "Yes." "What did he say before you opened the door?" I swallowed. The paper cup made the small, crisp sound of betrayal in my fingers. He said he'd come to do what he wanted to do, that it was all over. The sergeant's eyes flicked toward another man in a jacket that said something important I didn't bother to read. The other man wrote without lifting his pen. That sentence had lived in the hallway already, I realized. I had just carried it further along. "Okay," the sergeant said. "We've got you. You did right." "Did I?" I asked, and didn't say what I meant. Did I do the right thing for the city? For the girls whose names I did not yet know? For the soon-to-be lonely rooms? For the detective who would go home to a wife who would fetch him a towel and then cry when he didn't know how to put it down? "We needed him alive," he said, which was not a yes and not a no, just a statement about the math the state was about to do. They walked me out under the kind of sky you only notice when you've just offered your life up to it and gotten it back with a thumbprint on it. The parking lot was loud with lights and radios. The roofline threw sharp little flags into the wind. Everyone had a job and most people were doing it without being told, because that's what happens when the worst person in town steps into an office and asks to be caught. In the squad car I was nobody, and that was bliss. The upholstery smelled like old men after church. The partitions sawed the world in two. I thought of his hands on the back of the chair and how very careful he had been with the shape of the room. People think monsters love chaos. Sometimes what they love is order so strict it kills. At the station, a woman with a notebook and the haircut of someone who had surrendered personal style to the god of sleep met me in a doorway with the sentence, "We're very glad you're here." She led me to a room that contained 2 chairs, a table, a camera like a patient insect, and a box of tissues. The box was decorated with lemons as if they'd been placed there for a joke and then lost their nerve. She told me her name and that she'd be taking the first statement. Then the detective would come. Then someone from Victim Services would find me a place to sleep where my blood didn't recognize the ceiling. She asked me to start at door pressure. I did. I said everything I remembered, and when memory slowed, she didn't push. She let the silence sit until my mouth went to fetch more. "What did you feel when he made you lock the door?" she asked. "Useful," I said, and then covered my mouth with my hand as if the word had offended the room. "Useful," she repeated, writing it in a neat hand that looked like small iron fences. "And when he asked if I had kids," I added without being asked, "I lied to myself first about what the right answer was." "And what did you decide?" "That there isn't one." "Correct," she said, and I loved her like a cousin for not lying. The detective came like a man who has walked the length of a December twice and put it back where he found it. His tie had given up. His shirt had lost an argument with coffee. He looked at me, and my name left his mouth with deference and a possessive I had to forgive. My witness, my person in the middle of it, my good luck. He sat and made the camera earn its paycheck. He asked what he had to. Did the guns look alike? How far from the door had he been? Did he mention the mini-mart? The law office? Did he say why in any language a jury would recognize? He said time, I offered. He used time as a tool. He kept me in the hour he wanted. Did he seem proud, the detective asked. It was a word like a penny, small, filthy, exchanged too often. No, I said after letting my mind check the hallways. Not proud! Finished! Finished, he said and wrote it. He told me there would be photographs, and I nodded like I already knew. The body likes to be kept busy while the mind is looking under beds for its own self. A man with a flash came and took my wrists, my face, the line on my neck where the phone's hard plastic had written something on me I hadn't felt at the time. He was gentle in the way only people who've hurt the same way 100 times can be. When they finally moved me to a gentler room with a gentler chair and a blanket that didn't feel like deployments, the advocate appeared. A woman with kind hands and shoes built for running on carpet. She gave me a new paper cup and put it into my fingers the way you put a spoon into a baby's. Assumptive, hopeful. She said there was a shelter bed if I wanted it. My cousin's couch if I didn't. An officer for my door if I needed to see a silhouette behind it that belonged to someone trained. What do you recommend? I asked. That you make the choice that gives you the least to regret when you wake up at 3 a.m. and decide you did this wrong. I'd like to go to my cousin's, I said. I'd like to look at a familiar lamp that doesn't mean anything. She smiled like I'd passed a test she hadn't wanted to give. We can do that. I slept under a blanket that had forgotten how to smell like anything but detergent and dust. At 3, I woke with the certainty that there was still a gun in my face. I put my hand to my cheek and felt only the valleys of a day, and then my mouth remembered how to say no to things that weren't happening in the present tense. Morning came mean and ordinary. I stared at a toaster like we were in a standoff. My cousin made eggs. I cried into them a little and then ate them, which is how I know I was going to live. The phone rang and I looked at it like someone had thrown a snake into the room. The detective's voice sounded 10 years older in the morning light. We need you again, he said. You're in the paperwork now. I'm sorry. He told me some of what had come to them overnight. The law office, yes. The mini-mart, yes. Taylor Oil, yes. The woman at our own company, Joyce, wounded and maintaining, bless her stubborn heart. A man named J.D. dead. Others wounded. The list of shots in the city had the rhythm of a litany. And what no one at Woodline had known as we watched the clock eat 4 o'clock on the wall. The other list. The one the city wouldn't be able to hold when it first heard it. The house in Dover. The family. The bodies. The awful arithmetic of a holiday that had come dressed as a massacre. He admitted it? I asked, my voice a thin wire. He didn't have to, the detective said. But yes. He He stopped. I realized then how hard it must be to drag a sentence like that from the bag of 800 others you'll say in a day. We found enough. He told us enough. What am I in this? I asked, soft. A footnote? You're the hinge, he said, and I could hear in his voice that he knew the damage a word like hinge can do. You're the part that moves. I didn't go to work that day. I didn't go the next either. The town wore its shock like a too-tight church dress. People moved slowly as if their bones had forgotten how not to be careful. Everyone needed bread, and no one had an appetite. The paper printed the names it had and promised the names it didn't. The radio became a person you couldn't stand and couldn't hang up on. They asked me again to tell them how he'd stood, how he'd spoken, how he'd offered me a paper towel like a human being in a kitchen. They wanted to hear him in my mouth, which felt obscene and necessary, like holding someone else's baby when your hands aren't clean. I told them. I told them about the cinnamon and the hat that stayed on, and how he never said sorry because that word did not suit him. Did he seem conflicted? The prosecutor asked when she arrived with the air of someone who schedules grief. She was my age, but her mouth had learned more funerals. He seemed ordered, I said. Like a room where someone put everything back after too many guests. The prosecutor wrote that too. She would put it on a board for a jury later, and they would look at the words ordered and guests, and think about casseroles and Christmas and cutting cake, and find themselves nauseated without knowing why. They took him to a place with bars and paint that cannot decide what color it is. He told the camera things. He told it with a straight back and a half-turned mouth and a steady voice. He did not weep. He didn't mention me because I was not part of his story. I had been the phone he used to call the cops when he was finished being a person. The town made its sounds. Miss Peggy at the diner rewrote the specials with a shaky hand and still baked pie. The mechanic, 3 doors down, put every radio on the same station and then shut them all off at once. The post office huffed mail into boxes without checking whether the letters were going to break their recipients. The pastor of 3 churches wrote 1 sermon, crossed out 2/3 of it, and preached the 1/3 with a voice that lifted and lowered like a lorry on a long hill. At night, my cousin snored like a bear who'd given up hibernation. I lay awake and listened for doors opening in other rooms. I kept hearing the click of the lock, the syllable where my name goes, the kind of knock that assumes permission. I thought about his eyes when he asked if I had kids. I felt the shape of his question in my chest like a small animal making a bed. When the first court day came, the courthouse felt rehearsed. The benches knew how many people would sit. The floor forgave shoes. The doors practiced swinging without slamming. They brought him in with the choreography of a school play. He looked better under the lights than he had under the office flicker. Time and custody had smoothed a few roughnesses. He still smelled like cinnamon in my memory. I wondered what he smelled like now. Bleach, maybe. Men. He didn't look at me. I didn't insist. The prosecutor said charges and counts and numbers stacked like wood. The judge asked the usual. He answered the usual. The town sucked its teeth, upset to find itself in a narrative it had not been asked to outline. The law office sent flowers to the mini-mart, and the mini-mart sent hush to the law office. Taylor Oil got a new lock on the back door. Woodline put a permanent badge swipe on the entrance and a sign that asked us to smile for the camera as if it were our grandma with a fresh Polaroid. In the hallway, a TV reporter I'd never seen before said the words largest, worst ever with the reverence of a person delivering weather news that will ruin picnics. She ran a microphone under my chin like a fishing lure and asked me what it was like being in a room with him. I said, smaller, and her producer looked up from his cigarette like I'd given them the t-shirt. The detective found me on a bench and sat like a tired brother. "We're going to move quick," he said. "That a promise?" I asked. "A threat," he said, and the corner of his mouth did something like hope. A single act can be both the hinge and the door. Calling the police from the computer room moved him from rumor to custody, but it also swung open every hallway he'd tried to lock behind him. The search teams went through his life like careful housewives, opening drawers, lifting rugs, peering into boxes he believed were smarter than men. They brought out a map that had never needed unfolding. A letter that made a judge's mouth pull hard to one side. Photographs that shouldn't exist anymore. Trophies so small you wouldn't notice them on a table unless the light did the wrong thing. I didn't need to see any of it. I saw it anyway at night, because memory is cruel and likes to borrow images it has no right to and rearrange them until you think you were there. My job became to witness. The word sat awkwardly on me, too fancy for the way I still forgot to buy milk. But a witness is just someone who didn't look away and didn't pretend later that she had. I had sat in a chair and held a phone and not left. That made me useful to the part of the state that files papers with names like the People v. and lays out a path it hopes 12 ordinary minds can walk. They asked me to testify in the first case. The Russellville killings outside the home. The public ones. The shootings that tore holes in rooms where work gets done. I wore a gray dress with sleeves because my mother taught me to keep my arms covered in court. The bailiff said my name with a respect I didn't know how to hold. I sat down and my knees argued about whether to be seen. The prosecutor led me gently through it. The defense attorney asked me whether I was sure about colors and distances and the number of seconds between knocks. He was polite. He made a face when the judge made a joke that wasn't a joke. He looked at me like a father looks at a daughter who has disappointed him by growing up where he can't supervise it. I answered what I could. When he asked if I was afraid for my life, I said, yes, and felt half the courtroom nod and half the courtroom bristle as if fear were a political position. The jury looked at me like a puzzle and then like a picture. On the wall behind them, a clock's second hand stabbed its way around a circle it hadn't chosen. When my part was over, I folded back into the benches and watched other people carry their pieces to the table like potluck. The mini-mart clerk with the bandage at her hairline. The man from Taylor Oil who had run out into the parking lot and then back in because some kinds of loyalty are bigger than sense. Joyce, my stubborn boss, with her head wrapped, but her mouth still running like a reliable motor. The verdicts were numbers in a set that added up to guilty. The judge's voice, when he sentenced him for the Russellville shootings, sounded like it had practiced in a mirror and done okay. Death. Plus years that would never be counted. The man in the hat, he didn't wear it in court, blinked and then didn't. He didn't turn to look at anyone he'd hurt, because admitting our faces existed would have undone a theology he'd spent too long perfecting. Then came the second trial, the one with the number that made the paper's headlines go big and black. 14. The size of a classroom, the length of an ordinary family, plus a neighbor for dinner. They built the family in photographs and moved them through the room like a parade the dead insist on. The state told it in orderly pain. The defense did not try to say he hadn't. They tried to make a shape the law could live with around the why. There isn't one. There are only smaller whys that snap together and make a weapon, and then someone picks it up. I didn't have to talk in that courtroom, thank God. I sat and listened, and sometimes stood in the hallway and cried into a paper towel that smelled wrong, and the advocate pressed her hand into my shoulder the way a friend steadies a picture frame while you hammer a nail. He lashed out at the prosecutor once, when the letter was read aloud, the one that made it impossible to pretend the family hadn't been a house fire before it was a crime scene. He went for a gun and didn't get it. The courtroom made one sound. A gasp turned inward, and then remembered where it was and arranged itself around the men who get paid to stop stupid things from becoming forever. The second sentence felt like a page turned slowly that shouldn't slam. Another death. Another hair that won't lie down on the judge's head. Another day when the news anchor's voice wore its respectful tie. The governor signed papers that would have been cleaner if they were written in ink that admitted what it was doing. There were appeals and not appeals because he didn't want them. There were men who said he shouldn't get a say in how the paperwork about his own end was filed. There was a Supreme Court case named for someone who wasn't me and still felt like it included my throat. They set a date. They stopped it. They set another. He ate a last meal that no longer qualified as last, and I imagined him chewing and then swallowing that idea and feeling it sit wrong. The second time, the governor signed, and the paper didn't bleed. The room had fluorescent lights like every room where the state does its braver and worse work. He said something on the way out that sounded like a man who had decided to make his last sentence his own. He refused a minister. He refused visitors. He refused to be anything but the most him possible for as long as anyone was forced to look. And then there was a strange quiet that filled Arkansas like fog. People who had hated his name suddenly remembered to bring in plants before a freeze. Women washed Tupperware and returned it to neighbors. Men changed the oil in cars that had outlived love. The state exhaled in stages. The governor slept. The jailers ate cold pizza in a concrete room and talked about their kids' ball games. Russellville opened its post office at 9 and closed at 5, as if there hadn't been a day inside that building that had rearranged the sentence structure of the town. I moved apartments. 2 miles, no more. I learned the noise my new building makes when the wind gets into its ribs. I stood in a grocery aisle and stared at the cinnamon and realized my heart had a sense of humor I didn't care for. I bought the bottle anyway and baked something terrible and fed it to my cousin, and we laughed until we cried, and then cried until we had to laugh again to keep from falling into a hole with a name in it. If you're waiting for a clean moral, you will be disappointed by me. I don't have closure. I have cabinets that close and open without squeaking because I oil the hinges when they need it. I have the sentence, I did not die, and it sits on my tongue heavy and necessary. I have a Christmas where I left the house after dessert and stood on the sidewalk with a paper plate and listened to the ugly laughter of men on porches and thought, we're all still here. And some people aren't, and I don't know what to do with the math of that. Sometimes someone at church introduces me like a cousin and then says she's the one who called, and I want to be very small, and also I want to be a bell rung hard enough to scare birds. Children run past me with sugar-invented speed, and I do not grab their collars the way fear tells me to. I let them be loud. Loud children saved my life. They keep the walls from hearing other sounds. The computer room at Woodline got new carpet. I went back once, training the new dispatch clerk because the world keeps needing ordinary things. The aluminum tree wasn't in season. The lock made the same sound. I stood exactly where the warm boot print had been, and it was nothing but carpet. I put my hand on the back of the chair and took it away and wiped it on my jeans, and then felt foolish, and then forgave myself because mercy turns corners in its own time. When I tell this story now, which I do rarely and on purpose, I cheat for both of us. I make you look where I want. I give him fewer lines. I take back some of the air. But I keep the best part accurate. The way his voice softened as the sirens got close. The way he asked me to call you. The way we shared a small, stupid kindness over a paper towel. It matters that he surrendered. It doesn't make him less of what he was. But it made the math different. It meant the state could stand up in a room and say a word we don't understand and still find ourselves nodding at justice. What I have from that day is not courage. Courage is what you name it after it works. What I had was obedience to a better voice than my fear. Some part of me that said, pick up the phone, breathe. Don't run, unless your legs are smarter than the bullet. You can borrow that voice. It doesn't mind being shared. And this. I keep a paper towel folded in the glove box of my car now, the cheap tan kind that feels like the inside of a church basement. It's not a talisman. It's a tool. It wipes up what spills. It remembers what happened without telling me so. Sometimes I take it out and hold it and breathe into it like a fool on a bad day. Sometimes I throw it away because it's dirty and get another one and call that what it is, maintenance. This is what survival looks like here now. Not a headline, not a clean door closing. A woman in a warm room on the phone, watching the shape of a day spell itself out letter by awful letter and not turning the page until she's sure the right person is there to read the rest. How am I doing? Well, I moved 2 miles, keep cinnamon in the cabinet without flinching, and I still answer the phone. Killer reveal. Ronald Gene Simmons. Ronald Gene Simmons, 1940 to 1990, murdered 16 people in Arkansas over the 1987 Christmas season, 14 members of his family at their Dover home, and 2 people during a subsequent shooting spree in Russellville. On December 28, 1987, he shot multiple victims at several businesses, including a law office, Taylor Oil, the Sinclair Mini Mart, and Woodline Motor Freight, where he forced a worker to call police and then surrendered. Simmons was convicted in 2 trials, received death sentences, waived appeals, and was executed by lethal injection on June 25, 1990.